Nice. So if you could, welcome everybody, share in the chat where you're from, where you're coming from, where you're joining us from. I'm in Gainesville, Florida. Jean-Marc's in Tallahassee, Florida. All right. I think I have to do this now, Jean-Marc, right?
That's right.
even though I'm a Knoll. And yeah, let's see here. We got folks from Miami, got the U, St. Pete. Jean-Marc, make sure that in the chat you're posting to everyone. And
there we go. Yeah, that's right.
Erland, Daytona State College. Nice. Fort Lauderdale, Port Charlotte. Go Gators, Bonnie. Yeah, nice. Broward College. Miami Dade College. Atlantic Technical College. All the colleges. All the colleges and universities around. It's fantastic. Well, welcome everybody to our webinar today. I'm just going to fade out the music here. Thanks to the Maharaja Flamenco Trio for that music. And if you like it, if you like that music, I'm just going to give them credit here. I'm putting the website here, some nice Nuevo Flamenco music. So I'm going to pass it over to my colleague and dear friend, Jean-Marc.
Hello, everybody. So let's see here. We are here today to talk about a wise approach to online course design. Before we do that, let's take a quick look at the logistics. Now, are you guys seeing this, or is this?
We're seeing it.
Okay,
yeah, we can see it. Mm-hmm.
So we have two ways of participating for you who are participators in this webinar, participants, and that would be asking questions in the Q&A, and we can sort through these as we have time to do so. And then there will be some interactive portions, and we will use the chat for that. So you will have an opportunity to type in a few keywords that will be examples, thoughts that have to do with each of these phases that we'll be discussing, the phases of development. As you can see here, that you will be muted, so you're going to be listening rather than speaking. And then the other thing is that this will be recorded, and the recording will be available within 48 hours on the website. All right, so let's jump right in. So welcome to a wise approach to online course design. Ramin and I are co-sponsoring this webinar here, which is really about taking a systematic look at how to design courses, in particular when they're done online. When you're doing something in face-to-face, you have a lot more flexibility to kind of like on the fly make changes and engage the room and things like that. For online courses, a lot of times it makes sense to be a little bit more systematic in preparing. So this is hopefully going to help you run through some of these thoughts. Here's some QR codes if you want to click those or scan those to get to our websites. And of course, that's going to be also in the handouts, so you can get to that at a later time as well. So the outcomes for this webinar, we're going to be focusing on an overall general, very broad base of knowledge that we're building here. So on the one hand, you want to be able to set meaningful goals and set an appropriate scope for these kinds of developments. So if you're planning on giving a course and offering that course to the community, then there is lots of things that need to be thought about. And the first main thing is to understand what is the main focus of the course. You also want to have a very clear alignment of outcomes and objectives and assessments and content, so that everything that you're doing in the course is actually geared towards reaching a certain result within the participants, so that when they're completing the course, they'll be ready to do something, they'll be able to do something in the world. using strategies to coordinate and collaborate with stakeholders. A lot of times there are multiple subject matter experts involved, and maybe there are other contributors that are looking at edits, that are looking at media, things like that. These are stakeholders. Then we have also the idea that we want to create a consistent learning experience. So the experience of a learner throughout the course should be consistent, but then also if they're participating in a program where they're taking multiple courses, be nice for them to have a relatively consistent experience throughout the program as well. And in the end, it's important to have documentation for everything you've done so that later you can easily make changes or you can hand it off to somebody else who's taken over. So these are the outcomes. Very briefly, really not going to spend a lot of time here. This is based on the WISE design method, and it's 4 words that kind of make up the acronym WANT. You clearly define the problem that you're after, that the client is after. You inquire, you're looking into the details, you're systematically analyzing everything that has to do with what needs to be learned, in what context that this needs to be learned, and who's doing the learning and who's doing the performing later on. Based on that, you will then define a solution. And that solution a lot of times is educational. In some cases, it involves processes, it involves new tools, things like that. And finally, you're employing the solution, you're putting it out there, you're teaching the course, you're running the training, and then with that, you're collecting information and you're feeding it back into an evaluation to see whether things are actually happening the way that you planned. So this is the WISE design method. And what we're doing today is a version of that method that kind of uses keywords that are more geared towards the academic realm or the educational realm, schools, universities, colleges, and also the professional development programs that are associated with that. So we have the course edition, which uses the keywords justify, research, design, and teach. So let's jump right in. We're going to take each one at a time, each phase, and then we'll have an opportunity to kind of have some interaction at the end of each phase. So the first phase is justify. So that's kind of like figuring out what you want, what the student wants. So the point here is aligning the course with the needs. So what we want to make sure of is that we clearly understand why are we even thinking about giving this course? Who are the students and what do they need to improve? What do they need to learn? What skills, abilities do they need to acquire? We also need to know how we're actually measuring in the end what's happening in the world. So this is basically getting a sense for whether the people who are graduating from courses and programs, whether those people are then successful in translating that knowledge that they've gained, the skills they gained in the course into the world. How do we measure that? It's very important to know that, because that's also a way for you to then later justify that the program was a success, to get more money for funding, etc. That's the way you do that. Of course, there is an assessment that needs to happen. A lot of times in the context of education, we're assessing our students as they come in. These could be placement tests. So if we're having, for example, a situation where ESOL students are needing to learn at a certain level, we need to determine which level they're at and which level they want to reach to be able to set the correct parameters for our courses. And finally, there's a differentiation that we have to make between students. A lot of times we'll have, even in just regular courses where you have, college level courses, people come in at different levels of development with different backgrounds and different needs and abilities. And we need to kind of differentiate that and make sure that we're adjusting our content and our interactions, and sometimes even down to assignments, in a way that they make the best sense possible for the individual, while still at the same time kind of reaching the overall goal and making sure that we're grouping people together who need to be together. So this is the first phase. The first phase really just is dedicated to figuring out, what is this course supposed to be? Why is this course existing? Why do we create this? Who are the learners? And what are we trying to do? So at this point, we're opening up the chat, and Ramin is going to head it off with a few examples in the chat. And we're also going to be looking at examples that you type in. So I'm going to pull up the chat here. And as you can see, Ramin has typed in want justify. So this is the prompt for this first phase. And Ramin, do you have an example that you wanted to?
I do, and so I put that want justify there as just a heading, so we can kind of keep track in the chat of what we're discussing. And then I put an example here. So I put 4, and that is aligned with determined differences and individual needs. So as I'm kind of explaining my example, you all can think about an example that you like to share based off just on one of these boxes here, right, that we see under justify: align course and needs, identify success criteria, assess student readiness, or number 4, determine differences in individual needs. And so this is an example that I'm dealing with now, right? And that's, of course, to understand and plan for differentiation based on learners' levels, goals, and preferences. So this is something that is as we understand, is very important to kind of understand what the needs are of the students, and then that is going to inform how we develop the course syllabus, the curriculum, to make sure that everything aligns. So, as a specific example, we have a student, Naomi, who recently came from Haiti, and she lives currently with a relative who sponsored her green card application. She attended her schooling in her home country, but she wasn't able to complete her high school diploma. So Naomi speaks enough English to have a basic conversation about everyday life topics, but her reading and writing skills are less developed, right? So we're able to kind of understand her level. Her goals are to take advantage of the educational opportunities in the USA and finish her high school diploma. And her dream is to someday work in the medical field to help her community in the US, as well as back in Haiti. So that's just an example here of understanding our students to plan for differentiation based on what their levels are, what their goals are, and even what their learner preferences are. So if you all could share an example here in the webinar chat. And again, this is not a test. This is just an activity, an exercise, right, for us to practice and just seeing, okay, based off of this model here, and on this first stage here, what can we, the first step, what are some things that are important for us in order to understand how we can align the course with student needs, identify success criteria, assess student readiness, and to determine differences and individual needs. So feel free to just brainstorm here. And we have one for screen for visual, audio, kinesthetic. Okay, read, write. All right.
Is this for number 4 or is this for number 3?
Yeah, which one is this determining here, Professor? It could be, I think it could, let's say it's number 4. I was on screening. Okay, so maybe this is, let's say it's determining needs, right, and differences. Survey students determine needs. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So we got the self-evaluation. That's a possibility there to assess the student readiness. It could be something they do completely independently. Very nice.
And just going back to Professor Michael's, that's absolutely right. Understanding their learning preferences, right, and learning styles, and maybe what are some of their accessibility, challenges.
Very nice. And we have assess students' readiness, standardized test. Exactly. So how about, does anybody have a suggestion or an example for number 2? how do we do this in real life? The identifying the success criteria for when they're going out in the world. Okay, you can do a pre-post test. That's right. That's still a little academic. What we're looking for in number 2 is kind of like making the link to the real world. So for example, there could be industry level exams that people might have to pass in order to demonstrate their readiness. And we may have given them a prep course for that industry level exam, and then they go take that exam. That would be one example of how these success criteria might be measured, or bar exams, things like that.
Yeah, we have one from Bonnie here, a mock interview with industry specific questions.
Love it. Love it. Yes, exactly.
Yes. Yes. Good. We have one from Leanne. Ask employers for what employability skills they're looking for. So that's one of the stakeholders, right?
Yes.
An important stakeholder are employers.
Very much so.
Fantastic.
Very nice.
Good.
Yes, exactly. CompTIA.
I like Danielle's here. Demonstration of skill, for example, create a resume, right? That's kind of industry specific. Yep.
Great.
Good.
That's wonderful. Please keep them coming, but we're going to need to move on just in the interest of time. We're going to go to the next stage. So in the next stage, this is research, right? And for research, we are looking at a much more specific level of detail, right? Initially, we're looking at, in general, what do they need to learn? What is their life situation? What do they need? And at this point, we're going to be really specific. So at this point, we're going to need to know what are the actual goals of a course that we're designing, or a training that we're designing. And that, of course, will directly align to these outcomes that we've kind of identified as needs in the first step. In addition to that, we need to know, is it knowledge? Is it skills? Is it a combination of this? Is it abilities? Do we have to talk about how things feel to people, whether they make choices and things like that? So these are all the details that we need to kind of specify. When it comes to skills, sometimes we draw diagrams that kind of show how things work in progression. There might be processes, procedures that people need to know. Maybe they need to interpret rules and things like that. The other thing we need to know is who these people are. And we want to look at them from kind of both angles. We need to kind of know who are the teachers, so that we can design curriculum and courses, or if we're the teacher, we need to know what can we bring to the plate, right? And at the same time, we also need to know who our students are. That goes back to the first phase, where we're kind of harnessing some of this information that we've gathered through interviews, through surveys, through focus groups, and figuring out who these people are and what they need. At this point, we can also go in and kind of describe, the important characteristics that they might bring to the plate when they're participating in our course. And then we need to examine the learning and life environments. So a lot of times when you have academic topics, it's not super important in terms of like, where will they exercise the skills that they've learned. But the more specific you get, the more you want to make sure that the technology and the environment, the layout of rooms and things like that kind of is replicated in a reasonable fashion in your training environment, so that when they get into the real world, they're not going to be stumped by things like, oh, I've learned how to cook on a electrical stove, and now in this kitchen they have a gas stove, and I really don't know. I wasn't trained for that. So this is an example of this alignment between the learning environment and the actual performance environment that we want to investigate and make sure we get the things that are needed. And finally, from this, you're going to get a list of outcomes and objectives that are very specific to be driving what is included in this course and what students specifically have to be working on and accomplishing to reach these outcomes. So that is the research phase, and we're going to go back now into our chat and kind of talk a little bit about some examples for each of these boxes. And again, if you would follow the lead from last time, we're going to see what Ramin posed. We're going to discuss it a bit, and that gives you time to think about it. And when you post, please include the number so that we know which number you're referring to.
All right. So the next one here is our header: inquire, research the course topics. And I chose this number 2, right? So conduct needs analysis and plan for how to leverage the funds of knowledge of students and teachers. So, going back to Naomi, Naomi has experience as a caretaker. So, I could potentially, as her teacher, leverage her knowledge and experience to ask her to share her experiences with the class. So this can build Naomi's confidence. It can enable her peers to know her better. So this is building a community of learning, and it's rapport, right, in the classroom, as well as how to inform how I, as a teacher, as well as other teachers in the school, can leverage her knowledge, skills, and interests towards meeting her language and professional goals, right? So that can be in the classroom with understanding how, which will be the next step, right? Understanding how to design course activities, but also just how to either, if I have, opportunities to help Naomi to connect with other students maybe who have followed that same kind of career path, right? And connect them to create like a mentorship kind of situation, or just resources that might be available that engage Naomi and keep her interested and engaged in the course. So, as we all know, maintaining motivation and course engagement is very important for adult learners, as they are very busy and it can be challenging to come to class. So any way that we can support them and engage in their motivation, that's what we need to be doing.
Okay, we do have a question here, and we have one example. Thank you very much for sharing this. Yes, it would be important for us to have some kind of a document, maybe a matrix that kind of gives us an alignment of objectives, content, and skills. So that's very good. The question is, what is the difference between an outcome and an objective? And the way that I would look at it is the following. The outcome is basically a bullet point on your resume. That's what you take into the world. That's what happens after you're done with whatever classes, school, education. That's the outcome, right? That's what you're working towards. The objective, a lot of times, is that you are very specifically telling them what they need to work on in a particular unit within your course or within your training. So the objective would be very specific in terms of what are they given, what are the circumstances, and what are they trying to achieve in terms of a measurable step towards that outcome that they're building. So if the outcome is that they're able to have a conversation in a professional context in the language that they're learning, then an objective might be that they are able to distinguish the level of formality in a particular given conversational situation, and then correctly interpret that, and then as a follow-up be able to kind of participate in the conversation using a relative level of formality that matches that situation. Okay.
Thank you. Great question and great response. So we have some other contributions here in the chat. Bonnie says, in terms of state frameworks, think, standards and benchmarks, absolutely. So, that's where really everything should be stemming from, right? An understanding of, what are the standards, what's the framework, and how can we align course topics, right, to meet those standards and those benchmarks. So thank you, Bonnie. And June says, understanding cultural diversity. So understand that kind of goes underneath that similar thing with the funds of knowledge, right, that students bring to the classroom. And cultural diversity is a very important one. Linguistic, cultural diversity, understanding of how to approach certain challenges. Our adult learners come with so much skill set of how to address the challenges of life, how to network. And so, yes, understanding their experience with that and leveraging that, right? I think that's a key word, is how can we leverage those skills and experiences for the benefit of them and as well as everyone else in the class.
Exactly. And this is true. I agree that this is an element for number 3. It is an environment. It is part of the environment is kind of like the social context in which things are happening. So for example, learning about conversations and things like that. So this is definitely true. We have a few more examples here, and please keep them coming. This is really, really good. Much appreciate you thinking along. And while this is happening, if you do have any Q&A, then we're going to monitor that as well. So I have a couple of Q&A here. I'm going to jump in here. So we have assess students' readiness, use a standardized test. Okay, so that's more of a contribution. That's fine. We have a question here from Mr. Wallace, fellow teacher, is watching his training along with me as there's only one computer available. Will he get credited for attending? That I don't know if there's even any kind of credit that is associated with attending the seminar here today. That's probably a question for IPDE. Very good. All right, so we're going to move on. Again, we want to make sure we have a little bit of extra time at the end to kind of collect some overall questions. So thank you for keeping engaged here. And I see June has responded. So thank you very much, June, for giving that response there. All right, let's jump into the next stage, which is the design stage. And again, we are adopting here the terminology. So in this case, we're calling it design. And it is a good idea actually to start your design with an assessment. And sometimes because assessments happen later, after things have been discussed, sometimes the planning goes linear and people are like, oh, okay, what's my lesson like? What are my resources, etc. And then at the very end, they say, okay, well, I need to design some kind of an assessment. The philosophy that I'm promoting here, that we're promoting in this webinar, is that you should really stay focused on outcomes and objectives. And the next step into the content is actually to create the assignments and exams that are aligned with these objectives so that we can very much see, how do we know whether students actually are able to do this now, right? So once you have those, you can then go in and start defining some kind of a structure and the corresponding activity. And the structure kind of depends on what your context and circumstances are. So if it's a traditional course, you might have a certain number of weeks available, and the structure is typically driven by what do I do each week, how much time do I have, that sort of thing. But it could also be any other distinction. There could be modules within the self-paced, training or something like that, or it could just be a workshop and has a morning and an afternoon. So what you want is you want to have some kind of a structure that you're figuring out in terms of how these students are going to be chaperoned through learning this content, and what kinds of activities are they going to be doing? What will they be asked to do? And then, of course, at some point, you're going to have to jump in and really roll up your sleeves and write the instructions, write the stories that go along with it. If there are any worksheets, you either have them and you can share them, or you can create them specifically for a particular course. There might be videos or voice messages that you create that kind of like fill in and create content that students can later then access, that sort of thing. And finally, you want to envision and design a learner experience that kind of shows how are students entering the learning environment, doing things, navigating through the various places within the learning environment, and then finally, what happens when they graduate, when they exit, do they still have access to it, that kind of thing. So these are these student experiences that we have to design in order to make sure it's clear what happens. So even for face-to-face, you're going to have to figure out, what time is it time for students to get together in small groups or something like that. As always, we are now sharing. So we're going to jump back into the chat and follow Ramin's initial post.
All right. So I have here as our next stage here, solve or design the course. And my example here is for number 2, define course structure and activities. And as was alluded to in the previous stage, you know, first identifying in my context, as I am an educator of adult ESOL, is understanding a couple of things. So one, understanding the FDOE life and work competencies, right? So that would be, right, those 9 subject areas. I'm actually going to post them here in the chat as a reminder. And then, you know, so understanding, okay, let me base the syllabus here and make sure that they align and meet these life and work competencies, right? So since that is a critical part of the framework, and my program's mandate, right, to report, right, measurable skill gains, and that we're, you know, whatever the course that we're teaching is aligned with state mandates and with the framework. And then from there, looking into the standards, right? And for adult ESOL, that would be these anchor standards. So this is one here. An English language learner can adapt language choices to purpose, task, and audience when speaking and writing. So going back to my example with Naomi, you know, this can influence what activities we plan for across reading, writing, listening, vocabulary, grammar development, you know, through scaffolded activities that build communicative abilities, where Naomi can apply what she's learning to one, right, the GED, and then also to become a medical professional. So so that's kind of how all of that influences, right? All of those previous steps have led up to this design. Now, as we're getting into, we've identify the needs, right? I have done the research to understand the stakeholders, and now we're in the design phase here. All right, so we have a contribution here in the chat from Tian, and Tian says, okay, develop scenarios or experiential learning activities, mock or real life activities to apply learning. Absolutely. Absolutely. Good.
Number
And
4.
we have another from Dylan. Yes, 4, design student experience. If appropriate, open up the navigation so that students can move freely through the course without restrictions. This can make the experience more flexible for students and varying abilities. That's interesting. So that would be more kind of like a self-guided, it sounds like it's an online, right, kind of asynchronous course. So,
or it could be materials that are provided to support a synchronous course, and these materials could be available throughout the entire duration of the course, the semester, whatever it is.
Right.
So students can go back and kind of refer to these materials. That's certainly one way of doing it. On the opposite end of the scale would be a way to completely control who sees what when, and kind of allow students to easily progress through the store, the course, right? I was going to go with an analogy of a store. So there are 2 different types of stores. You can walk into a store and all the aisles are accessible to you, and you go to any aisle and go in any direction you want. And I'm not sure if you have them here in America, but in Switzerland, where I grew up, we have stores that are just like, you have to walk through the entire store.
Well, that's IKEA, right?
If you've ever been to IKEA, it's kind of a little bit like that, right?
Right.
The European model of you just walk through the entire store, you'll see everything once, and you grab it when you need it, and in the end, there's the register and you check out. Right. So that would be adaptive release of content based on what the student has already accomplished, if they're working on their own pace. And if it's by week, then you can say, I'm going to release weeks 1 week at a time, maybe with certain things foreshadowing so that they can look ahead. But we really don't want students to work ahead. So that could be part of that student experience as well.
Yeah, it's fascinating though, Dylan. Thanks for sharing that. And I would love to ask, it would be very interesting if you can conduct some research around that, right? What could be, 2 courses, one where it's kind of more learner-centered in a sense, where students can kind of choose how they enter the course and what they do, versus something that's more kind of guided, right? That would be very interesting. Okay. Nice.
And then
Nice.
Thane, student dash pace. So could you elaborate that on that, please? Am I reading this correctly? Are we
Yeah.
kind of trying to decide like how quickly students can move through here? Is that for number 4? Is that the student experience? Yeah, great. Okay. So
Good.
yes, the pace is super important, right? And part of the pace is also a matter of scope. How much do we pack in there? And in some cases, especially when it comes to like higher education, where things are a little bit more fluid, you have a lot of leeway in terms of supplemental readings and time that students may or may not spend. There are other contexts in which you really have to be very, very clear in terms of how much time can students afford to spend on any kind of activity. And so your planning of the student experience will also include an estimation of, like how much time will they spend reading. If I give them an assignment of 300 pages for next week or something like that, how much time it might take for them to approach a project or an assignment, and what the steps are in there. So all of that will definitely impact the pacing that we're allowing students to either choose or we're setting for them, right? To make
Yeah.
sure they're going through.
And if I could just add something that's related to this pace is also accountability, right? So how to support our learners in that accountability process so that they keep that pace, right, that we have in mind. So establishing that pace early on.
And you're clarifying here so that students might be working on different levels. So we were talking about the differentiation all the way back in the first phase. We're at the bottom there. We were talking about the fact that we might need to differentiate students that work at slightly different levels. And that can be part of the student experience in terms of maybe adding additional things that students who are more advanced can get into while not requiring them for other students. But that will definitely also kind of lead back to a number of other steps that we need to include, prepare ourselves for being able to offer in step number 4. So on the one hand, we may need to have additional activities designed for these students. So those have to be designed in number 2 and then developed in number 3 in order for us to then be able to release them for number 4. So all these things are connected.
A lot of great comments here in the chat. I'm really enjoying the synergy here, sharing experiences and comments. I'm just going to jump here to Bonnie. Bonnie says, create folders for weekly assignments. The weekly folders correspond with a weekly pace chart so that they are able to quickly identify whether or not they're on pace. This can be used with either the self-pace or adaptive release model. So it's kind of the best of both worlds there, right? So have these folders, have these modules, allow students to be able to kind of progress at their pace, at their own pace, whether that be kind of a bit slower or a bit faster. And then, but maybe at the same time, have a deadline for that module or that folder, and then be able to kind of move everyone along, at the same time.
Right. And that the pace chart that you're referencing there, Bonnie, that's a very important kind of thing. There are various ways to do this. There could be entire Excel sheets that kind of are used and designed to estimate a student effort, right? And that will then lead into, guiding them for pacing and saying, give them a heads up, you might need 5 days to work on this. So think about planning that ahead. So yes, these kinds of charts and other documents, control documents, are super important when we're planning this. And the other thing you're mentioning about the folders is important too. We need to get organized when we're planning and developing a course to have the right kinds of places for all the various documents and planning documents and the final documents. There might be reviews and approvals that these documents go through. All of this has to be organized somewhere, ideal in a shared environment so that people can get to it and share comments and tracking changes and things like that.
All right. Okay, Jean-Marc, should we move along?
I think we will. Yes, absolutely. And we might be able to circle back to any open questions that might be around here at the end of this. So let's jump into the next phase. So that is teach, right? That is what I in generic terms call employ, the E in WISE, right? It is putting it out there. It is using the solution. It is keeping the solution alive with maintenance, etc. So while you're teaching the course is a good idea, and I'm sure y'all are doing that, is keeping notes about what worked, what didn't work, and then you can use these notes to kind of make improvements later on. The other thing you want to do is you want to kind of gather as much data as possible. So on the one hand, these are grades. There might be, more detailed feedback on assignments, or maybe even analyze, do an item analysis on a test or something like that. And of course, also the feedback. So a lot of times we'll have surveys in these courses where we're asking the participants to give feedback. By the way, we will have a survey at the end of this webinar as well, where you're going to be giving us feedback on this webinar. And then you collect this information in a way to really evaluate the course and make sure that it's doing what it needs to do, fine tune it, that sort of thing, and keeping it kind of relevant. So that could mean that things have changed in the outside world that we're depending on, and we have to fix those links into the outside world, web links, etc. We might have to make revisions to different components, activities, assessments, depending on changes in the world. Maybe there are new policies that come out and we need to reflect those, or something is retired and is no longer relevant, it's deprecated, all sorts of possibilities where information might change, and we need to go in and update the course, all the way down to retiring the course altogether. Maybe the course itself is no longer relevant, and we have a different course that comes in and takes over. So that's the last one. We're at 41 minutes here. Take about 5 or so, maybe maximum no more than 10 minutes here talking about this in the chat, and then we'll open it up for everybody to kind of just ask additional questions that you might have here.
Great. Thank you, Jean-Marc. So again, I put employee teach the course to mark our next stage. And I'm sharing an example. So based off one, teach the course. So this is something that I'm doing right now. So create a shared document with other teachers to note and share ideas, suggestions, and questions about the course materials, activities, student feedback. So this is actually something that colleagues and I are doing in a course where we're teaching the same course, but several different sections. So creating a shared document based off of these categories of each module, right? So that we can, as we're going through the module, we can share these suggestions, these questions, student feedback, get together, right? As in these kind of teacher planning meetings to share our experiences. And all of that is going to go towards, editing that course shell, let's say, right, for the next time around. So I really like this approach because it's not waiting to the end of the course where I tend to forget, things along the way. We're doing this systematically, every other week, and then be able to share and kind of engage in how we're doing now, right? We're sharing our ideas that spurs other ideas, other perspectives. And that all goes to the benefit of the course and of course to the students as well.
All right, the floor is open for you to kind of pick one of these steps and make a comment about it. Anything that has to do with maybe evaluating a course, or what kinds of things are necessary to maintain the course in number 4. So if anybody would like to add something here, we'll leave it open for another minute or so. All right.
So Dylan, I'm going to read out Dylan's response. So maintain the course. In an online course, it is important to collect student feedback on their experience in the course from a technology standpoint. As a student, I often find technical issues that I then bring up to the instructor, and or reports to the end of course evaluations. If we fix these issues, then the future students will have a better experience. Some of them even have to be fixed immediately, which require tech support assistance. I'm laughing because Dylan, the struggle is real. I deal with this on a daily basis. And absolutely, if we can prepare, if we can learn from these and make note of them and kind of like have these as notes in a handoff document, right, for future instructors of the course, that makes these technical challenges that are bound to arise, more manageable, right? And we can address them on the spot as well as consider what we need to do to kind of, so they don't come up again.
And the other thing to mention here is something that is not explicitly listed, but you might add it to the previous phase, which is you need to test everything. So when you're building something yourself, you need to test it, and then ideally you need to ask somebody else to test it for you as well, so that they can go through and find these technical glitches. You click on a link, it doesn't work, things like that. So yes, absolutely, testing is important. We also sometimes call that formative evaluation. So the testing is not necessarily limited to the technical aspects of the implementation of the course, but it might also actually go as deep as, does the student understand these directions that we're giving them for an assignment or something like that? And for that, of course, it's important to also have access to testers who live at that level, right? So not just take other teachers who live in their own realm and maybe already understand certain things, but also include some potential learners or learners from a previous semester that can then go in and kind of look at it from that angle.
And if I could just riff off that really quickly, Jean-Marc, because this is something where some colleagues and I prepared a survey form, and the participants are English language learners. And so we tested the survey form with some sample participants who were English language learners, and they were able to help us to really simplify the language that made it appropriate, right, for the population that we're surveying. So, testing things out, getting feedback from an actual population, sample population that is going to engage with the materials is a great point.
And SME as well, that's important. So the subject matter expert, of course, needs to review the course to make sure that from a subject matter perspective, everything's correct. There isn't any factual, errors or anything like that in there. What the subject matter expert won't be able to do quite as well, even if they're an experienced teacher, is necessary to put themselves into the shoes of somebody who doesn't know anything about this and might get stomped by an acronym that everybody thinks we know and they don't know it. So there are certain things that we need to think about. And then, of course, there's a whole slew of other things such as accessibility, etc., that we need to keep in mind for that as well.
So Tian, I'm gonna, there's a nice exchange here that based off of an example she brought up. So Tian says, conduct an exit interview or exit questionnaire for the students as to how they felt the course helped them achieve their learning goals or did not help them achieve their learning goals. So yeah, exit interviews. And I would, add to that, to that great point, getting that formative feedback from students, after each module, right? So having them to reflect on how they benefited from that activity, from that module, because again, students can tend to forget how things, how they felt about certain activities at the end of the course. So yeah, collecting that formative feedback from students is a great point there, Tian. And excuse me if I'm not pronouncing your name correctly. I hope I am.
But we don't need to leave the discussion. We can continue discussion. I just kind of blended in the wrap-up slide that shows us those 4 phases, also giving you an opportunity to kind of review this one more time and maybe ask a question or make another statement here in the chat about any of these components. The quality control standards that are being mentioned here by Professor Michael, can't see the whole, Michael McCarthy, that's very important. And there are frameworks out there that have been developed to do that. For example, Quality Matters is one of those frameworks, and that's mostly used like at the higher education level, where complex online programs perhaps are being developed and then given to students, delivered online that way. And to have these frameworks that you can use more like checklists, but they're quite complex and involved, is important because they will point you to certain things that you may not be aware of, and that can be painfully discovered later when you're already in the midst of having students go through the course. So this is very important. What else do we have here? Okay, great. Any other questions from anybody here? Let's see, do we have, kind of lost my interface. Q&A doesn't have anything. Chat. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah, just some great, again, just some great contributions here in the chat. Just as far as I wanted just to point out one from Bonnie saying that, you know, if instructions have multiple steps, I find it is important to include a short video of myself explaining the instructions. So yeah, if that's a possibility there to provide a video. I mean, that's just a lot of people like myself. I'm a very visual audio learner. So having those multiple ways of explaining directions, as well as having a model example, right, of what our expectations are, and being able to analyze a model example, I know is helpful for me as a learner, and I know as a teacher is a great aid in helping me to clearly explain and articulate what my expectations are.
And that, of course, belongs into box number 3 under design. So where we're planning and then developing these media pieces that help us deliver, the content. So these could be content directly related to content, but it could also be kind of like how to submit an assignment and things like that are a little bit more, at a more administrative or logistical level. Okay. Anything else? We can go on to the final slide here. This is us again. We are super excited to hear from you. If you have anything, any questions, anything else you want to follow up on, you can reach out to us via email. You can go check out our websites and figure out the details of what we have done. Is the WISE method you, Jean-Marc Wise? Yes, I developed this method. I have a PhD in instructional systems design. This method really is nothing else than what you typically see in instructional design, but it has a deeper focus on making sure that we understand what needs to be achieved in the world. A lot of times we're jumping in with design. Somebody says, oh, I need a course on sexual harassment. And then you just go through and start building things and writing scripts and things like that. And you never really take the time to say, well, where does that plug in? And what problem are we specifically trying to solve? How do we know it's a problem? How are we measuring the problem? So that later we can then not only justify the expense, but also see the results. So that's that. Thank you.
Excellent. Yes. And I can testify to really benefiting from collaborating with Jean-Marc. Been collaborating together on several professional development courses and resources through IPDE and the Florida Department of Education. And applying this method, I will say, takes more time and effort up front, in planning, thinking things through, making sure that there's a strong foundation that's connected to, as those examples that I share, to a framework, to standards, making sure those align throughout to meet the needs of students, and address things like pacing, and making sure that all of the activities are relevant and applicable, and clear, right, for the participants. So that's one reason why we wanted to have this webinar, is to kind of share this approach to designing courses. I know that all of us are involved in that as educators, whether it's at the teacher level or the administrative level. So I encourage you to be able to kind of go back, access this PowerPoint as well as this recording. It will be available to you through the IPDE website for you to access later, as well as to share with your colleagues. So at any time, as Jean-Marc said, feel free to reach out to us if you need some support. You'll see here a poll that just came up. So if you could please provide your feedback on this survey about this webinar. And while you're doing that, I wanted to let you know that the next webinar will be tomorrow at 3 p.m. And that is on teaching algebra to GED math students, right? And so I think Jean-Marc and I might attend that, because we could probably brush up on our algebra skills. So we want to just thank you again for your wonderful participation. I really enjoyed, I know Jean-Marc did as well, your chat responses. Thank you so much. That gives us energy as well. So we appreciate that. And please reach out to us, stay connected to us. You know, a big part of this professional development work is networking and staying connected and leveraging, you know, our funds of knowledge as professionals and experts and learners as well. So thank you all.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Yeah.